wildlife biologist Eric Orff with my New Hampshire Fish and Wildlife YouTube channel. Today I'm going to go back in time again and I dug up some diaries of mine. I have been a wildlife biologist in New Hampshire for nearly a half a century now, and I have over 40 years of diaries, and this one is from 1983. Well, 1983 was the year that the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department was asked to remove some deer from Long Island in Winnipesaukee. I've told some other stories, but I don't think I've told this one yet. And prior to that, in the 60s into the early 70s, there was a deer hunt by veterans or disabled veterans on Long Island, where a number of deer were removed each year, and that special hunt came to an end in the 80s. And in the 70s, and by the mid 80s here in 1983, the deer herd had grown significantly on the island. In fact, Fish and Game had the volunteers of some UNH students, and we swept the island and counted over 100 deer that year prior to this. So in late fall, it was politically decided that we should try to remove some of these deer because they were really stripping the island of vegetation. And Long Island is one of the larger islands in Winnipesaukee. It's about a mile or more long, half a mile wide, and it has a very high deer densities of over 100 deer on that mile and a half square area. So I opened my diaries today and checked on a similar date. Here is November 17th, 1983 that I'm looking at, and that day apparently we had darted some deer earlier in the evening, and then it says I had a deer here. I sent Murray Fay, one of our technicians, south, and we captured the deer, almost all does, and took them further south in the state. We tagged them, and they were released because in most of the state then it was bucks only, so we could release does that had been tranquilized, and hunters were not to be taking them because you really shouldn't eat the meat of a deer that has been tranquilized for obvious reasons. So it said at 1 a.m. I sent Murray Fay south with a deer. Then I went back to look for deer that we had darted earlier and had not found. Well, I found it at 3:15 a.m. It says I hog-tied it and lugged it out. The deer blatted the whole time and fought like a mule. I lost the portable radio. And this portable radio, by the way, was loaned to me by the New Hampshire Fish and Game director, Charlie Berry. He had just got the radio, and they thought we should have some communication on the island, so they gave me this radio to put in my pocket as I was out tranquilizing these deer. Well, I remember, finding that deer. I would not use the light. We tranquilized the deers with a dart about this long, and it had a radio at the end and with a long wire, and so I could use a headset to find the deer, always in the dark. I used no light whatsoever until I put my hands on the deer, tied them up, and blindfolded them, and then I would turn a light on, because it would stress the deer, or if you turned the light on or made noise before that, they would simply get up and run off. So you had to find them in the dark. And I remember following this deer, it kept going, and then finally laid down, and I was able to get my hands on it. But when I grabbed it, as I said, it fought like a mule. And in that preceding tussle, I lost the portable radio. Well, I remember the next morning, the 18th, the local CO arrived, and I said, well, I've got some good news and some bad news. I caught the deer that we couldn't find last night, but I lost the director's radio. His eyes lit up. Well, I went back later that morning, and was able to figure out where I had wrestled with that deer at 3:15 a.m. and was able in the leaf litter to find the portable radio before we had any rain or bad weather. So that just so I said here I went to bed at 4:37 a.m. Oh, and I got up at 7 a.m. and found the portable radio. So I know I didn't lay down for very long. So then I switched to the next page here in my diary, just where there was a summary of the week or 10 days that I first worked on Long Island in November of 1983. And I see that on November 7th, I worked 15 hours that day, 15 and a half on the 8th, 15 and a half on the 9th, 17 on the 10th, 15 and a half on the 11th, 19 hours on the 12th, and so it looks like over this period of time I actually worked 190 hours. Here's another, in the next few days, 17 hours, 22 and a half, 19 and a half, 15 hours, 7 and a half. So over less than a 2-week period, I worked 190 hours. And when you're doing a project like this, you just can't sleep. And well, first of all, I was too excited most of the time to sleep. It just gets your adrenaline right up, and you're going after these deer. You got to catch them. You got to do everything you can to catch a deer. And I simply couldn't sleep, or I didn't sleep very much, 2 or 3 hours a night, I guess, by the looks of things. So put in a lot of time. I think in that 10-day period, I think we removed about 25 deer from Long Island that fall. So we were successful in reducing deer numbers by about 25% over that. Looks like about a 10 or, well, the last day I have here is the 20th. So actually a 2-week period starting on November 7th through November 20th, 1983. So it was an exciting time to be a wildlife biologist and work on Long Island, Winnipesaukee, New Hampshire, removing live deer.